This is Roger Simon.
And Lionel Chetwynd.
Welcome back to Poliwood. Today we have a guest from the nation's capital, Ron Radosh, the historian, PJ Media columnist, author most recently on a book on Truman. Ron's here to discuss with Lionel and me the Showtime series by our good friend and colleague Oliver Stone, known as Oliver Stone's Untold History of the United States. Is that the name above the title, or is that the name above the title?
That's the name above the title. Just very briefly, this is a series appearing on Showtime, so it's getting an audience. It's a book by Stone and his partner, Zanuck, right?
As we say in Yiddish, Peter Nudnik.
Peter Nudnik. Peter Nudnik. Look, let me just kick it off with this question, okay? Because this is, first of all, it seemed to me to be an entirely imaginary pastiche of someone's nightmare. But then I came across something I thought was really odd. In order to establish that Lenin was the great peace lover, early on they say, Lenin so loved peace that he signed the Brest-Litovsk Treaty. That's the treaty that ended Russia's involvement in World War I, even though he had to go up Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Poland, as if they were provinces. And what struck me about that was odd was that's the Brezhnev doctrine. That's post-Stalinism. There's two definite strains of communist propaganda in it. Is the whole thing simply a rehash of Stalinism with later Brezhnevism?
From my perspective, as I said in the Weekly Standard article I wrote about the series, is that he is actually rehashing, literally, almost word for word, citation for citation, a 1952 book published in the United States and subsidized by the KGB through their disinformation program. A book written by the late Karl Marzani, a secret communist whose whole publishing house was financed by the Soviets surreptitiously. It's unadulterated 50s, early 60s style Soviet propaganda. The Soviets were the forces for peace. Stalin was a great leader, a man who wanted peace, and the imperialist US just wouldn't let him have the peace he deserved and wanted. I mean, that's the theme of the film. It's old-style, pro-communist, pro-Soviet propaganda that has been thoroughly discredited by all reasonable mainstream historians, like John L. Gaddis at Yale. And these guys purport to be writing history, the untold history. And if you look at the bibliography in their book, a book, by the way, which I don't think anyone in their right mind will read, it's unreadable, 1,000-page book. The only citations in their bibliography are to left-wing historians and not to anyone who's worked on the Cold War who disagrees with them at all. So if you read the book and you say, oh, one of the scams is they say, Stone goes on all the shows and he says the same thing. We have footnotes. Everything's footnoted. CBS vetted our whole thing and said it's completely accurate. Well, that's the first lie he tells, because when CBS, meaning their lawyer, CBS owns Showtime, vets their stuff, it's for libel. It's not for historical accuracy. The CBS lawyers are not historians or scholars. They're just interested in one thing, that nobody sues them.
Would Truman sue?
Truman's not with us anymore. One of the things, they throw Truman out of context. They have a quote from him and they leave out the rest of the quotation mark. They do that constantly. They cite portions of things that seem to validate their argument and leave out the rest of sentences that show that the point being made is the opposite. These guys are liars, pure and simple. They are frauds. And I'm a professional historian. I mean, it's really an outrage that a mainstream network owned by CBS can even broadcast this tripe. I mean, I think this is so outrageous. It's mind-boggling.
I wanted to ask you about this. It's hard to frame this question briefly, but one of the great the picture, the crown jewel of Western civilization is in so many ways World War II. A struggle for freedom that was going to make the world safe democracy in our time. People came from Omaha and Saskatchewan to fight in Europe. And it's being destroyed. But these guys say we didn't get in the war soon enough. How important is it to the new left to support the old left's view of Stalin, the pact, and all of that?
That's a good question. I think there is no more new left. Insofar as they want their whole thing is that America is the evil country that's to blame for everything bad in the world. And if during the war years, uh, the enemy was Hitler and the ally was Stalin, we should have given Stalin more because he was on our side, and we weren't generous enough to him. Uh, they don't realize. I mean, the great Yale historian Timothy Snyder wrote a book called Bloodlands, which everybody says uh, is perhaps a major book for understanding the whole tragedy of World War II. And essentially, he shows that the two totalitarian powers, Soviet Russia and Nazi Germany, divided up all of Europe between them. And in all the areas their forces and armies controlled, it was a virtual bloodbath, killing hundreds of thousands of people. Both powers were equally guilty. From Stone's perspective, there was only one guilty power, the United States, which was not letting Stalin have what he should have had. Therefore, there should have been a second front earlier. Uh, Stalin, of course, uh, suffered most. He makes a big deal of saying that people don't realize that Soviets lost more than any other power. Well, in fact, one knows that. One of the reasons the Soviets lost so many people is that Stalin had decimated the entire military leadership of his country through in the period of the Great Purges, and Stalin didn't believe that the Nazis would break the pact. Every bit of intelligence he got saying that the Nazis were going to invade and violate the Nazi-Soviet pact, he considered that to be Nazi disinformation, and therefore he wasn't prepared. Stalin is really largely responsible for his own failure and the failure of the Soviet military to prepare for World War II. It came upon him as a surprise. You won't find that in Stone's documentary either. When they signed the pact, the Soviets occupied one half of Poland and took it for themselves, and the Nazis occupied the other half. They were both imperial aggressors. None of that is in Stone.
None of that is in stone. It seems to me you couldn't sell this unless you had a generation, two generations of Americans who have been so badly educated in the high schools and the universities that they do not know the history of World War II. That they began in 1939, that we didn't get it.
What they don't also know about the Gulag Archipelago, they don't know about Solzhenitsyn, they don't know about the purges, they don't know about any of that. I mean, they don't know that the Soviet Union was a mind-bendingly awful totalitarian state.
You could argue, why should they know that was happening inside the Soviet Union? My question to Ron is, though,
you can't even argue
this, when you argue about the Second Front, when you argue about Stalin and World War, entering the war, it means that you have a generation of people that don't know that the war began in 1939, that the American left opposed our entry into the war in support of Britain, and on and on and on and on. You have to have two generations of people woefully undereducated, and maybe that ignorance is...
You know, which brings us to one...
You know, they're not starting something. I think this is a plum on the cake.
It brings us to the real guilty party here. Oliver Stone is simply a maniac. We can take him off the table for a moment. The real guilty party, and I'd like to hear what Ron thinks about this, is CBS and Showtime for presenting stuff like this, which is not even remotely true.
Right. I mean, it is... I wish there could be some way to sue them for malpractice. They're misinforming generations of Americans who watch it only because of Stone's celebrity name. And it really is totally vile. Let me just bring it to one other thing they do. The hero of the whole series, particularly the first 5 episodes, is Henry A. Wallace, the man who FDR thankfully removed from the vice presidential ticket, putting in Truman in his place. He then became Secretary of Commerce. Stone says in the 2 or 3 of the episodes that Wallace was the sole chance America had to have peace at the end of World War II and reach a good agreement with Stalin. Well, actually, Henry Wallace was lock, stock, and barrel, a total dupe of the communists, both of Stalin and of the American communists, whose bidding he stupidly did, not even realizing what he was doing. If Wallace had been president, as Stone wishes in his fantasy world, we wouldn't have had a generation of peace. We would have pursued policies that would have allowed Stalin to take over not only Eastern Europe, but to take over France and Italy in particular, because the U.S. would have not stood in his way under a Wallace presidency. And by his own word, Wallace said if he had been president, he would have appointed 2 men who were secret communists and working secretly for the KGB, Harry Dexter White, had been the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, who were actual servants of the KGB, into cabinet posts. And we would have had a government of the United States that would have willingly done Stalin's bidding. And there's no way of telling. I'm not into counterfactual history, but it would have been a complete disaster. The West would have been abandoned. There would have been no Marshall Plan. Remember that Henry Wallace opposed the Marshall Plan of aid to reconstruct Western Europe. He opposed the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It would have been a walkover for Stalin. It would have taken over Western Europe, and the whole fate of the world would have changed because you would have had the other great totalitarian power winning. There wouldn't have even been a Cold War. Stalin would have just won the fate of the post-war world.
Well, have you ever tried to reach Showtime on this? Does anybody, I mean, understand what the executives were thinking when they did this, other than trying to get subscribers?
You know more about that than I do. I think they look at the bottom line. This will be a money maker. We got Oliver Stone's name. Now, by his own admission, the real culprit is this Peter Kuznick, a historian at American University, who knows nothing, taught a course, which is how he got to know Oliver Stone. He taught a course called Oliver Stone's View of America. This is a history course in a great university in our nation's capital. He met Stone, and then they decided to work together. Kuznick wrote the book and put together the material that Stone obviously arranged for documentary purposes, got the footage and edited it. But it's all Kuznick's doing. And Kuznick is, if you had to invent a prototype of a stupid left-wing historian, that's Peter Kuznick. He's the model for it. He says openly, if you check his own website, that the goal of history, as he sees it, is to convert his students, to prepare them to work for socialist revolution. And that's what he believes. And now he's doing this not only in his classroom, I feel sorry for his students, but he's doing it for the public at large with his TV series. Well, at least we can shut it off and not watch it. His students don't have that opportunity.
And they don't know the difference. I mean, they think this is the real deal. Anyway, I think we should leave it there. We'll bring back another look at this later on when we see how this is fared at the box office, or meaning at the Showtime box office, the subscriber land. It's really sad. It's a very bad moment in our history. I think we'd all agree when this kind of lies are told to the younger generation.
And we're lucky for a guy like you, Ron.
I salute Ron Radosh more than almost anybody I know for saving the truth for some people. And now over to Matt Atchity at Rotten Tomatoes for the coming movies.
Hi, I'm Matt Atchity, editor-in-chief of RottenTomatoes.com, here to let you know what's fresh and what's rotten in theaters this weekend. First up is a movie called Playing for Keeps, starring Gerard Butler, Catherine Zeta-Jones, Jessica Biel, Uma Thurman, all people who are talented, all people who should have known better than to be in this film. This is a story about a guy who is a former pro soccer player who now is washed up, ends up coaching his son's soccer team, and all of the soccer moms basically throw themselves at him. This movie stinks. It's getting a 0%, the goose egg. And we've got 40-something reviews so far. It might stay pretty low. Nobody really likes this movie at all. They all say that the writing is pretty bad. The actors try and make a go of it, but for a movie that has so many charming and fun actors in it, there's really nothing really enjoyable here. So probably you're best to stay away from it unless you really want to see what a 0% movie looks like. Next up is a movie that's coming back to theaters called End of Watch. End of Watch stars Jake Gyllenhaal and Michael Pena as a couple of cops in South Central Los Angeles. And a lot of it is really just their day-to-day dealings with the community and each other. The chemistry between the two leads here is fantastic. I gotta tell you, this is one of my favorite movies of the year, and I can't recommend this highly enough. And thankfully, it's back in theaters this weekend, opening nationwide, because the studio is trying to get some awards love. Since this is the time of year that nominations start to come in. The movie's 85% on the tomato meter. I definitely recommend it if you haven't seen it before. It is kind of violent. It's kind of a gritty story. It's directed by the guy who wrote Training Day, but it's something, again, I highly recommend, and a far better choice than seeing that damn soccer movie this week. That's it for all the new movies in theaters this weekend. For all of the latest reviews and all of the movies coming to home video this week, make sure to check back on RottenTomatoes.com.
Thanks, Matt. This is Roger Simon.
And Lionel Chetwynd.
Next week in Poliwood.